3 payments, 3 dates, 3 amounts, and somehow 3 different stories that don't match. Imagine wiring your own money out 6 times, watching it vanish into companies that don't exist, then sitting under oath and telling the bank you don't know where it went. That's not confusion. That's a system failure, or something worse. So here's the question. When $4.1 million disappears from a federal account, is it incompetence or design? If you care about where public money goes and who gets to hide it, hit subscribe right now. Because what happened next wasn't oversight. It was exposure. This is not a normal congressional hearing. This is a pressure test of whether accountability still functions when power is on the line. And at the center of it sits Stephen Miller, facing a sequence of numbers that refuse to stay quiet. $847,000, $1.2 million, $1.05 million, stacking into a total that no longer sounds like administrative noise, but like a pattern. Thomas Massie doesn't open with outrage. He opens with precision. Dates, transfers, receipts. And that choice matters, because in a system built on procedure, facts are not just information, they are leverage. Here's the first thing you need to understand as a viewer, as a taxpayer, as someone watching this unfold from outside that room. This isn't about politics yet. This is about a basic expectation. If money leaves a public account, someone should be able to explain where it went and why. That's not ideology. That's baseline governance. So when Massie lays out a transfer, March 15th, $847,000, routed through DHS to a company with no employees, no address, no operational history, the hearing stops being routine. It becomes a contradiction in motion. And Miller's response? Not denial, not explanation, not even a redirect to policy. Instead, the first fracture appears. I am not aware. But that answer collapses under its own weight the moment Massie reframes the question, not asking what Miller knows, but showing what the record already proves. Because once a document exists, awareness is no longer the issue. Accountability is. Now, shift perspective for a second. Step out of the hearing room and into the mindset of an average American watching this clip. You pay taxes. You assume there are systems, checks, audits, oversight, that track where that money goes. So when you hear that a Treasury analyst flagged the transfer as suspicious and someone above them shut it down, the question isn't just, what happened? It becomes, what part of the system failed? And was it supposed to? Massie doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. He stacks evidence instead. A memo issued 3 days after the transfer, locking all related documents under law enforcement sensitive. That phrase sounds technical, protective, necessary. But here's the problem. Those classifications are designed to shield investigations, not financial transactions that have already occurred. So now the contradiction sharpens. If there was no wrongdoing, why seal the records? If the transaction was legitimate, why block a mandatory suspicious activity report? And if everything was above board, why does every layer of response move in the same direction, away from transparency? This is where the hearing shifts into prosecutorial territory, because we're no longer dealing with a single unexplained payment. We're looking at a sequence. 6 transfers, 6 shell entities, $4.1 million with no measurable operational return. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The moment those numbers line up, the burden of proof flips. It's no longer on the investigator to prove wrongdoing. It's on the official to explain the absence of it. So ask yourself this. If a private citizen moved money this way, what would happen next? Would they get time to Not recall? Would they be allowed to decline a yes or no answer? Or would the system move quickly, decisively, without hesitation? Because that's the real frame of this story. Not left versus right, not policy versus policy, but whether the rules change depending on who is sitting at the table. And this is exactly where the hearing stops being about numbers and starts becoming about silence. Because after the first transfer is established, after the memo is introduced, after the Treasury flag is documented, something else enters the room that no one can redact, no one can classify, and no one can spin. Time, not hours, not days, seconds. 47 of them to be exact. 47 seconds where Stephen Miller has the opportunity to do one simple thing: explain. And he doesn't. That silence isn't empty. It's loaded. Because in a normal exchange, hesitation might mean uncertainty. But in a controlled environment, under oath, with legal counsel present, hesitation becomes something else. It becomes a decision, a calculation. What can be said, what cannot be said, and what happens if the wrong answer is chosen. Now step back again, because this is where the average viewer starts to feel the shift. You're not just watching a politician dodge a question. You're watching a system hit a boundary, where information exists, but accountability stalls. And that boundary matters, because if it holds here, it can hold anywhere. Massey understands this. That's why he doesn't rush the moment. He lets it breathe. Then he does something more dangerous than accusation. He adds more evidence. A second transfer. April 2nd. $1.2 million. Different shell company. Same pattern. No employees. No physical address. No verifiable activity. Then a third. April 9th. Another $1.05 million. Then more. April 15th. May 1st. Until the total doesn't just suggest irregularity, it establishes repetition. And repetition is where coincidence dies. Because one unexplained transaction might be error. 2 might be oversight. 6 becomes a system. Here's the second Luan GM, and it cuts deeper than the first. This is not a transparency problem. This is a pattern consistency problem. Every transfer follows the same structure. Every company shares the same absence of reality. And every layer of response, from classification to blocked reporting, moves in sync to prevent scrutiny. So now the question evolves. Not, what is this payment? But, who designed the structure that allowed 6 of them to happen the exact same way? And this is where Miller's position becomes impossible to maintain, because he tries to retreat into scale, a massive federal department, not personally involved in every transaction. But Massey closes that door immediately. The authorization chain routes through Miller's own office. The policy division under his authority classifies the records. His name appears where decisions converge. This is not proximity. This is centrality. Now, consider the ethical dimension, because this is where the story stops being procedural and starts becoming human. Every dollar in that $4.1 million came from somewhere. From taxpayers. From budgets justified under the language of national security, border protection, public necessity. So when that money leaves the system and produces no measurable return, no infrastructure, no increased capacity, no operational output, the loss isn't abstract. It's functional. It means fewer resources where they were promised, fewer protections where they were justified, and a widening gap between what the public is told and what actually happens. And here's the uncomfortable insight a lot of viewers don't want to confront. If a system can reroute millions without explanation, it doesn't just fail once. It creates a template for doing it again. So when Miller finally speaks again, lowering his voice, distancing himself from the transactions, it doesn't resolve the tension. It intensifies it. Because at this point, the hearing is no longer asking for detail. It's asking for ownership. And that is the one answer that still hasn't been given. And this is the moment the hearing crosses a line most viewers don't even realize exists. The line between explanation and exposure. Because up to this point, Stephen Miller still has options. He can clarify scope, defer to classified briefings, lean on procedural language. But Thomas Massie does something that removes all of those exits at once. He simplifies the question, not into policy, not into process, into a single decision point. Did you authorize these payments, yes or no? That question matters more than anything that came before it, because it strips away complexity. No memos, no classifications, no departmental scale, just agency, just responsibility. And Miller doesn't answer. Instead, something even more revealing happens. His legal counsel steps in, invoking executive privilege. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a shield, a legal mechanism, a legitimate boundary. But here's the third Luangiem, and it's critical. Executive privilege is not designed to protect financial opacity. It protects communications, deliberations, advice between the executive and the president. It does not cover the movement of public money into private entities. It does not override statutory reporting requirements, and it certainly does not erase the obligation to explain how taxpayer funds were used. So when that privilege is invoked here, it doesn't function as protection. It functions as a signal. A signal that whatever answer sits behind that yes or no question is more damaging than silence. Now pause and think about that, not as a viewer, but as someone living inside the system this represents. If a government official can decline to confirm whether they approved multi-million-dollar transfers and the justification is simply executive authority, then what exactly is left of oversight? What mechanism still forces clarity? Massie doesn't argue this point emotionally. He dismantles it logically. He states plainly that privilege does not apply to wire transfers, that it cannot be used to override congressional oversight of public funds. And that's when the hearing reaches its most dangerous stage, not loud, not chaotic, but controlled. Because once the legal shield is exposed as misapplied, everything left is voluntary. The answer now depends entirely on whether Miller chooses to give it. He doesn't. He looks at his attorney. He looks back at the table. His hands press flat, knuckles whitening under pressure. And then the sentence comes. Not loud, not defiant, but final. He declines to answer. No denial, no explanation, just refusal. And that refusal lands harder than any accusation ever could. Because here's the fourth Luangiem. In a structured inquiry, silence is not neutral. It carries direction. If the answer were clean, it would be given. If the transactions were routine, they would be explained. If the system functioned as intended, the documentation would support it openly. But none of that happens. Instead, what the public is left with is a pattern of movement without explanation, a chain of authorization without ownership, and a refusal at the exact point where clarity becomes unavoidable. Now layer in the final piece Massie introduces, the operational data. While $4.1 million is being transferred out, border operations show no measurable improvement, no increase in capacity, no new systems deployed, no infrastructure built. That detail changes everything. Because now the question isn't just, where did the money go? It becomes, what was it supposed to accomplish, and why didn't it? And when those two questions collide, the silence becomes something else entirely. Not hesitation, not uncertainty, but a gap that someone, somewhere, designed not to be filled. And this is where everything that happened in that room stops being a hearing and becomes a verdict without a gavel. Because by the time Thomas Massey steps back from the microphone, the question is no longer hanging in the air. It's already been answered, just not with words. 6 payments, 6 shell companies, $4.1 million, and a federal official who declines to say whether he authorized any of it. That is not ambiguity. That is a pattern reaching its conclusion. Now here's the 5th Luan gem, the one that matters beyond this room, beyond these names, beyond this moment. A system does not break when money goes missing. Systems have safeguards for that. A system breaks when the mechanisms designed to explain that loss are either bypassed, blocked, or voluntarily abandoned. And that is exactly what you just watched. The Treasury flag was stopped. The records were sealed. The reporting requirements were overridden. And when the final layer, the human layer, the person with authority, was asked to answer, the response was silence. So what does that mean for someone sitting at home watching this? It means the line between "we don't know yet" and "we're not allowed to know" just got thinner. It means the distance between public accountability and private decision-making just got wider. And it means that the system you rely on to track, audit, and explain the use of your money can, under the right conditions, be redirected without immediate consequence. That's not a partisan issue, that's structural. Because if one office can move funds through entities that don't exist on paper, and the only response when questioned is legal shielding and refusal, then the precedent is already set. Not for one administration, for any administration. Now let's bring this back to the moral frame, because this is where the story actually lands. This isn't just about missing millions. It's about what those millions were supposed to represent: security, infrastructure, operational capacity, promises made to justify budgets, policies, enforcement decisions. And when that money produces no visible result, no measurable impact, no documented return, the loss isn't just financial. It's trust. Trust that when a number is approved, it corresponds to something real. Trust that when oversight is triggered, it leads somewhere. Trust that when questions are asked under oath, answers follow. And here, none of those things happen. Instead, what you're left with is a room full of people who heard the same facts, saw the same documents, watched the same silence, and now have to decide what that silence means. Because silence is not empty. It points somewhere. So ask yourself this, and don't answer it quickly. If a private citizen moved money this way, how long would it take before investigators knocked on their door? Hours? Days? Now ask the harder question. What changes when that person sits inside the system instead of outside it? Because that is the real divide exposed in this moment. Not law versus lawlessness, but enforcement versus exception. And if exceptions become normal, then the law doesn't disappear. It just stops applying evenly. So here's where this leaves you. Not as a viewer, but as someone inside the system this story reflects. Do you accept a structure where answers can be declined at the exact moment they matter most? Do you trust a process where oversight can be slowed, redirected, or neutralized before it reaches a conclusion? And most importantly, if accountability depends on pressure, what happens when that pressure fades? If you believe these questions matter, don't let this conversation stop here. Like the video, share it so more people see what actually happened in that room, and subscribe to the channel, because the next phase of this story isn't speculation. It's names, it's accounts, and it's the part no one can ignore once it's public.